It's 20 years since the Kargil war, and SNI founder and editor-in-chief Nitin Gokhale reported from the front lines for 45 days. No one better to look back and look forward on the whole situation. Initially, and so much has been written about it and talked about in intelligence failure. There were reports from 1998 itself, not heeded by both the army and the political establishment. Have those lessons been learned?
I think so, yes. In fact, it's good to look back 20 years later. And I was lucky to be there for Outlook magazine. Can never forget what Vinod Mehta, as the editor-in-chief of Outlook, just picked me up from the Northeast and sent me there. And one of the enduring reports in Outlook is about the intelligence failure, or the lack of seriousness on part of the political establishment, as well as, of course, the military leadership and the intelligence community. Lessons certainly have been learned, because even during Kargil there was one intelligence coup, if you remember, that the conversation between General Musharraf and his chief of general staff was taped, or sort of taken by the RNAW, and it gave India the advantage. It was released after much debate within the government. So it was a mixed bag, really. And since then, the governments, successive governments, have really strengthened the intelligence apparatus, and no better proof of that than what India did in Balakot, where now it can be revealed that at least three Indian sources were in the Balakot camp 4 days before the strike, the Indian Air Force strike took place, and they sent back pictures. So India has actually upped its intelligence capability within Pakistan, and also to acquire information from there. But I still have some reservations about the coordination, which again has improved tremendously. I mean, if you look at the last 5 years, India has managed to avert a major terrorist strike in any of the big cities, or cities outside Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. So that actually is a testimony to the better coordination and better information gathering capabilities of the intelligence community, as well as the three armed forces. But you can never be good. You have to always be better than good, and there is nothing that you cannot improve further. So I think certainly we have come a long way from what happened in Kargil.
Intelligence warnings were there. What about the political dynamics at that time, in terms of both countries? India and Pakistan had just a year back tested their nuclear weapons. Prime Minister Vajpayee had embarked on the Lahore trip, and then the declaration. So was there a political dynamic also in possibly going a little less serious on what Pakistan was doing?
Indeed, there was. In fact, you rightly put the context here in this conversation, because the nuclear test, both sides conducted in May 1998, and that brought in a sense of, I won't call it complacency, but a sense of feeling that now that both sides are nuclear, there will be no conventional war, or even subconventional war. That was disproved in the Kargil Dras Batalik conflict that took place in the summer of 1999. One. Number two, the Lahore bus yatra actually lulled the political leadership, I would say, in India as well as in Pakistan, into a complacent mindset that now the spirit of peace is going to be all pervasive. Neither of these leaders on the either side of the border really took into account the Pakistani army's independent, autonomous approach to India, and that was a disaster. I would also blame a bit of complacency in the Indian military and intelligence community leadership, which should have actually been on its guard, despite the Lahore Bus Yatra spirit pervading the subcontinent. So that is extremely important, that the military has to think outside the political domain, and yet give advice to the political leadership that you cannot lower your guard, which didn't happen perhaps in Kargil. And we know that because of that, even early reports of intrusions and build-up in Skardu and Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir were either ignored or were dismissed as alarmist.
Again, when you're talking about the military should be prepared for any eventuality, even if it's out of the box in terms of the political and the geostrategic dimensions at that particular time. Now, this was again then General Pervez Musharraf just dusting off plans that were already there. It was extremely secretive, I believe. But when you're talking about nuclear powers, there is this theory of stability, instability, the paradox, so as to speak, about conventional war. Since you're two nuclear powers, conventional war should be reduced. But then here, as you're saying, it's completely disproved.
It was disproved, and don't forget that it was less than a year after the nuclear tests when both the sides went, became declared nuclear powers. Now, it was a learning curve for both sides, and therefore, I think there was a bit of hesitation in terms of becoming aggressive, which was very evident on the Indian side, which was also fueled by Western nations, which said that constantly the refrain was two nuclear armed neighbors, nuclear flashpoint in the Indian subcontinent, which prevented Prime Minister Vajpayee from allowing the Indian forces to cross the line of control. Which meant that the Indian armed forces took, or especially the Indian army, took many more casualties than it should have, because they were prevented from crossing the line of control. Now, as a result, because it was in the immediate aftermath of the nuclear test, that hesitation and that mindset was very defensive in terms of escalating. But 20 years later, we have seen, or maybe 18 years later, we have seen that mindset being changed by a bold leader like Prime Minister Modi, who has more or less called Pakistan's nuclear bluff by ordering cross-border land raids by special forces in post-Uri in 2016, and especially Balakot, which actually went into mainland Pakistan. Now, that is a dynamic we'll have to again wait and watch. Maybe 20 years later, we'll talk about it. But certainly that dynamic has changed. But in Kargil, that dynamic was very much weighing on the leadership's part.
But there always is the fear of a nuclear escalation. And do both countries, have they done enough wargaming to make sure that it doesn't go that far? Or how does that whole dynamic
No,
work?
there has been enough wargaming, all right, but it depends again. The dynamics is on the particular situation, the context, and the leaders on both sides. See, Pervez Musharraf was a reckless risk taker, where he wanted to avenge his failure to recapture Siachen in the mid 80s, when he was a brigadier leading the Special Services Group. And India had captured Siachen in 1984, the heights of Siachen, the Bilafondla, Siala, Guyangla passes. And Pakistan has never been able to get over that fact. And they've tried number of times. There's a famous battle of where Bana Singh recaptured the Qaid-e-Azam post in Siachen. So actually Kargil, as Indian commanders, army commanders see it in Northern Command, was a result of Pakistan's failure to recapture Siachen. And therefore Musharraf was well placed to do all that. But he was reckless, and he had not wargamed enough. He had a tactical brilliance, or the move was a tactically brilliant move, but strategically failure. I think he failed to understand what it would mean.
Again, when now you're talking about the lessons learned, completely different situation, completely different leaders, the whole dynamics is separate. But the fact that the LC can be crossed, you still two nuclear powers there, and the intelligence that you were pointing out that has gone both before and during the assessment of damage.
In fact, yes. Now there is a lesson in what happened in Balakot, that while Balakot was bombed is indisputable. But the bomb damage assessment couldn't be done because of various factors, whether the bomb used and the objective of the strike itself. The objective was a strike, as India has said, was to target the terrorist camps and the terrorists, not civilians, not military installations. So it was a limited objective which was achieved. But you're right, as far as the nuclear dimension is concerned, it has not gone away. It is very much there, and if it escalates, who knows what happens. So in fact, Prime Minister Modi in his campaign speeches have spoken about Qatl Ki Raat on the 27th, when Wing Commander Abhinandan was captured by Pakistan. So was it about missile strikes, missiles being readied, where there were nuclear missiles or where there were conventional missiles? We don't know. Only those people who were in touch with each other from both sides would know. But certainly this has a inherent risk of escalation going out of control.
Again, when you're talking about lessons learned in terms of the coordination between the army and the air force during Kargil, if I'm not wrong, 71 was the first time that jets, the vampires, were used in the Kargil sector. Soon after that, we had casualties, both Nachiketa and Ahuja, a Me Chopper also going down, Stingers used, all those lessons in terms of interoperability between the two services. Have those been learned?
I think they've been learned very well now, and the current Commander-in-Chief of the Western Air Command was saying the other day, and as the Army and the Air Force chiefs have said at other occasions, several lessons from there have been taken. One, that today's wars, if they are launched, conventional wars will have to be swift. They'll have to be coordinated. It cannot be done in isolation, either by the Air Force or the Army. And three, there is better communication in terms of even tactical communication. In Kargil, the problem was that the command centers were spread out. You had a command center in Western Command, the Western Air Command was in Delhi, the Northern Command was in Udhampur. There was not even an Air Force officer placed in Northern Command, but all that has changed. Now you have an advanced headquarter of the Air Force co-located with the Northern Command, with the Western Command of the Army, with the Northern Command of the Army. So lots of lessons have been learned, lots of mechanisms have been put in place. But the proof of the pudding, as usual, is in eating. And if next time when this happens, how much of the coordination will be really effective, we'll have to wait and watch. Hopefully there will be no such war really. But they have really put in place lots of systems.
The US played a role in Kargil. You saw what Bill Clinton did with Nawaz Sharif when he went to Washington. That was a key part of the whole.
Oh, it was. In fact, if you see the difference again in 20 years is the hyphenation that time was very much the dominant factor. India-Pakistan hyphenation in those days, or those years. And it was Bill Clinton who called him on 4th of July. In fact, it's exactly 20 years ago that Nawaz Sharif was called.
There's going to be a military parade.
Military parade and all that. And then he's, yeah, exactly. So he was called and told to withdraw the forces. But and they had a role to play. But if you again see, this was not a war at all in Balakot or in post-Uri. But none of these countries now send their diplomats scurrying to Indian subcontinent, or sort of try and burn the lines. Although there was again during Balakot and after, there was a lot of phone calls exchanged, a lot of views shared, but it's no longer as intense in the Western nations, the worry about India-Pakistan rivalry, at least not publicly, but certainly that element of risk about two nuclear-armed nations clashing and the escalation going out of control remains in today's context. But US will continue to play a role because not much has come out about it. US has given us validation of intelligence inputs that Indian sources had because they have better satellites, they have better insights into Pakistan. So all that continues.
It was called, Kargil was called the first televised, South Asia's first televised war. There are pros and cons of the media coverage.
Of course there are, and that Kargil is in everybody's mind and it's in everybody's memory because of the, all the images that were transmitted back from there by the television cameras and the kind of fervor it generated across the country. But I have a different view slightly about the effectiveness of media or the so-called military media synergy, because I thought the military media synergy was far better in the 1971 war because it was well thought out. There was a plan to it where the entire diplomatic, political, military, social capital of India was used to portray the Pakistani army as a demon in East Pakistan, sort of carrying out genocide against the Bengalis in East Pakistan. So by the time the war started on 3rd of December 1971, India was justified in joining the war. And it was a well thought out plan, it was a proactive, preemptive plan. In Kargil, all of us who interacted with the army especially and stayed with them and looked at their bravery, their sacrifices, their triumphs and tragedies, it happened by chance. It wasn't a planned effort, and that's the lesson, that's the outcome of what happened in Kargil. I think since then, the armed forces have learned a lot of lessons. They have put in place proper mechanism, a proper organization in every armed force to look after media interaction and engagement. But again, there are gaps there, which we can speak separately. But certainly there are gaps there.
But like you said, but there was, for example, ME had placed Ravinder Jassal in the MOD during Kargil. There was that there, and lessons that have probably not been learned because information warfare now is so important, both in the dogfight and Balakot, on how the defense forces dealt with it. But then that, as you said, is for another day.
Yes, that's for another day. But I mean, we had a small example of that. That on the first day when the Balakot strike happened, the messaging was perfect. It was pithy. It was to the point. It was not too verbose, and people took or interpreted the way they wanted. The media wanted. I'm talking about from the government and the military point of view. On this second day onwards, when the air battle happened and subsequently Abhinandan's capture and beyond, I think India lost the plot there. So again, lessons have to be learned from there.
As Santana said, if you forget history, you're condemned to repeat it. Nathan, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.